going on, SNO-GO Tribe? I'm Chase Wagstaff from SNO-GO. We are today going to do the daily maintenance checklist on the SNO-GO Shift. Just as an additional reference, we have a SNO-GO equipment checklist on the service tab on our website. It's downloadable for free. This is what all of our ski resorts use and a lot of our rental shops. So if you want to have an actual checklist to go over, there's one on our website for you to use. The first thing you want to check on your bike before you go out riding, we're going to start up from the handlebar. So I always work top to bottom. So you want to make sure all your handlebar screws are tight. But most importantly on your handlebars is your handlebar grip screws. They're usually found underneath. It's a 3mm Allen wrench. The reason why this is so important is if you're going fast and your grips are loose and they just slide off the bar for whatever reason because they're not tight, obviously that would not be good. So the most important thing I always check on my handlebars are the grips themselves. I'll check these frequently to make sure that they stay tight. And then also the adjustable stem screw right here. So if you're adjusting this up and down for different people frequently, you want to make sure that it stays tight. And there's one important caveat to this piece right here. If you can imagine, there's a gear system inside this pivot, and sometimes people will tighten it gear on gear. So look at my fingers as if they're gears. If you tighten it gear on gear and then you go riding, it'll break loose and become loose again. So as you're tightening this bolt, you want to shake the handlebar and make sure that the gears are seated into each other as you're tightening this. So that's just one thing to note. Obviously your other 4mm Allen wrench screws here for the stem. Always make sure all of those bolts are tight at all times. Moving on to the front fork. This is not a very frequent thing. I have really never seen it, but just to be safe, your through axle bolt, this is the far side of it. You want to make sure that the axle's never coming out. You'll visually see the head of or the shoulder of this bolt backing out. So always make sure that that's tight. And then the front screw or the quick release knob here. So obviously this is tightened and loosened a lot to bring the ski on and off. There is a recessed hole inside this plate right here that the knob goes into. So when you put this all the way in, you want to make sure this is flush and then tighten this down, and then you want to tighten this as tight as you can with your hands. And then all the Allen wrench screws down here, you want to make sure those are tight as well. As for the fork, I always ride with mine open, but it's a preference thing. If you want to lock out the fork, you push it down and it's locked out, bring it up, and then it's fully open. So that's a preference thing, up to you. I recommend leaving it open because then it's less stress on your body if you're hitting bumps. So moving down, actually we're going to go over the belt real quick. So it's always good to have 3 to 5 extra key rings at all times. As you guys, most of you know, this key ring is meant to break. So if you were to fall over on the bike, the leash will knock the bike over, preventing it from continuing down the mountain. And if you're going fast enough, this key ring will break, and it's designed and engineered to break at 75 pounds of pressure. So that'll break, and all you do is just ring one more back on. And the most important thing here is you only want to be carabinered onto one ring at a time. If you double it up, then it doubles the strength, and it won't work properly. So have one ring at all times. Make sure that the belt, everything's in good working fashion. Pretty simple. Moving on down to the rear chassis, we're going to go into pretty good depth down here. But the main thing I always do, the first test I do, I call it the lateral ski test, where I put both hands on the bindings. And what I'm doing is I'm going to move the bindings back and forward. And as you can see on this, as I do it, nothing's loose, which is what I'm looking for. But in the event that these bolts were loose, you would see some slop and you would have the ability to move the skis front and back, which is not good. So it's an easy, quick test. If you're at the resort and you feel like something's not right, I'll come back here with my gloves on and just shake the bindings forward and backward motion. And that's an easy way to pinpoint where there's an issue. Because if there is one, you'll see somewhere around here, you'll see looseness and something wiggling. The other thing I want to go over is these quick release pins. A lot of it's just learning how to use it. So these pins are designed to have a 2-click method. So what I mean by that is you're going to hear 1 click and then 2 clicks, and that's fully engaged. And that's how you want your both front and back quick release pins to be. And then to disengage that, you're going to see that there's this little bent part right here, all I'm doing is I'm going to push up on it, and then with the lanyard, with my other finger, I'm just pulling back, and it'll come right out. It's a very easy way to pull these pins inside and out, or in and out, and I just wanted to go over that with you guys. Other than that, we're going to break this bike apart real quick, and then we're going to go over the rear slat system and the new G4 componentry. Okay, we're moving on to the rear chassis, and I took it apart just for filming reasons so you guys can see in more depth. First thing I want to go over is there's 5 tools now to work on the whole bike. You're going to have a 3, 4, and a 5 Allen wrench, and we recommend T-handles, and I'll go over that in a minute, and then a 10 and a 15 wrench. These 5 tools will work on every part of the bike, and so this is what you'll need to get a set of to keep your bike up to par. So the first thing that we're going to go over is the first thing I do when I'm doing my maintenance check is I'll put a T-handle in each bolt and spin it. And as you can see right here, as I spin, the nut and the bolt spin together. So you'll see that. That's what I'm looking for. And the reason for that is every bolt is Loctited. And you don't want to break that bond. And so as long as the bolt is spinning together and you feel friction, it's not just like a really loose spin, like I can't push that, it's got friction going all the way around. That's how you want it to be. So for whatever reason, one's loose, I'm going to show you what we're going to do to fix that. But before we do that, I want to go over the most important part of this rear chassis, and it's this top center bolt right here. If you've watched our previous Gen 3 bike maintenance, I talked about it in that video. This bolt right here is the most important bolt, and the reason is because all the leverage coming from the handlebars transfers through this bolt to all the other bolts and the rear skis. So everything's pivoting through this one bolt, and so if it ever comes loose and it can wiggle, you're basically giving it room to break, because when there's room, it just fatigues the bolt and it'll end up breaking it. But when the bolt is tight and stretching itself, which is when a bolt is at its strongest, it'll never break. And so the main thing I'm always checking, if I'm just doing a quick check, I'm at the resort, just want to make sure everything's good, I'm going to put a T-handle in this or an Allen wrench and spin it, and it should have more friction than every other bolt on the bike. And so I'm going to go over that here in a minute, but I wanted to point that out first. So this is the one bolt that if it breaks, your tower won't be able to control the rear skis. But if another bolt breaks, obviously it's not good, you don't want to continue riding, but you'll at least be able to get the bike down without a major hassle. But this top center one is the most important. The next thing is these side bolts. We call these the tower links right here. These side bolts right here of the tower links are also should be as tight as you can get them. And it's a 5 Allen wrench as well. And I'm not going to be able to tighten this because these are already tight. But these, you just tighten as strong as you can. If they ever come loose, if you ever see them backing out, reapply Loctite and tighten those as tight as you possibly can. So, other than that, once you've gone through every single bolt and spun it and make sure that everything's spinning together, the next thing you want to do is check your binding screws, make sure everything's tight there, which these generally don't come loose, but just make sure everything visually looks good. You know, move your tower pivot, make sure everything's solid. You should be able to not wiggle anything, so everything should be perfectly tight. The last and final test we do, and I'll go over this in more depth here in 1 second, is a drop test. So you should be able to bring the skis up, let go, and it should fall. And so if you bring it up like halfway and it just sticks and doesn't fall, it means you've over tightened one of your pivoting bolts. And so I'm going to go into that right now. In the event you guys have to replace a bolt or you break a bolt or whatever, if you have to take a bolt out and replace any of this mechanism, I want to show you guys what it looks like inside. So the new design of this G4 slat system consists of a needle bearing setup, as well as the SNO-GO bolt, and then a bushing. So the bushing is going to go in the control arm. The SNO-GO bolt goes through. Then you're going to have one side of the bearing go in, then this side, and then the middle, and then the other washer. And this is the most important part. If you guys can see how that washer right now is not around the bushing, but the moment I push it up, it snaps into place. What you want is this bushing or this washer has to be around that bushing for it to spin freely. So in the event, I'm going to show you guys right now on this, that one of these comes loose. I'm going to just fully loosen this up so you guys can see me do this. So that bolt is completely loose. I'm going to kind of shake it up so you guys can see that. So now that washer has just sunk like this. And so if I tighten it, you're going to see that washer is going to be interfering with that bushing. So I'm going to show you what you got to do to make sure that doesn't happen. And then tighten this up till I feel resistance. So once I feel resistance, which is right there, I'm going to take the wrench out. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to spin the T-handle around. And what's going to happen is that that washer eventually will find its way back into place with that bushing and seat in, and it almost feels like it clicks in. And what happens is it'll feel like the bolt breaks free again and becomes loose. Oh, right there, and you even hear it. So now it's loose again. And what's happening is that washer is just clipping into place like that. It's just going into place. So sometimes if you just start cranking down and tightening it up, it's going to tighten down with that interference. But the moment you start turning this T-bar, like I was showing you guys, it'll really just seat into place. So now what I'm going to do is put the wrench back on, tighten it about a half turn, you'll feel the resistance again, and then there we go. Now the bolt's tight and the wrench has friction. It's definitely not moving by itself, but it's not like locked up either. And then the one test that I use every time I build a chassis, if you want to come zoom in right here on the nut, there, you should see one thread poke out at the back side of the nut. So the bolt will be poking out just about one thread. If it's perfectly flush, then that means that the washer has not seated into place. The only other thing I recommend is anytime you break a Loctite or a bond of Loctite, take the nut off fully, apply your Loctite, and then re-thread it back in and do what I just went over. We use high strength Loctite on the pivot bolts. It's actually the gray Loctite, so it doesn't require heat like the red does, but it's still a higher strength bond. And then on everything else, we typically use a medium strength bond. Use your own preferences on that stuff, but I would recommend using Loctite on every bolt on the bike just so nothing backs out. But you should still, every single ride, be checking all of these bolts. Okay, now we're going to go over the skis. And the most important check that I do is on the rear chassis. I'll get behind it and I'm going to grab the back tips of the rear skis and I'm going to shake them laterally. So I'm going to be going back and forth like this to see if there's any wiggle in the ski. And the reason why I do that is because there's 4 bolts here on the stomp pad that you have to take off to get to the 4 ski screws that are mounting the skis to the bike. And so if they're loose, you'll be able to hear or feel the skis move. So right here, obviously there's no movement, so they're obviously tight. I Loctite every one of my bike screws, and they come pre-Loctited out of the box with medium strength Loctite. But obviously, if you're riding icier terrain and there's a lot of vibration, after a lot of rides, bolts will vibrate loose, just like on a mountain bike. So very frequently, I would be taking these stomp pads off, making sure those 4 ski screws are tight. But in between, when you're checking those, I'll just wiggle these back skis. And then the last thing I do is obviously check all 3 skis and the bases to make sure there's no damage to the edges or the skis. And then as far as maintenance on the skis, what you want to do is a rub-on or spray-on wax, because these are extruded bases, and we use extruded bases for durability, so they're a little bit stronger than a typical ski. But because of that, you're not going to get much advantage out of a hot wax over a rub-on. But if I'm going to go out for a good day of riding, I'm just going to pre-wax my skis at home and then have a full day. And then next time I go riding, I wax them again because I like my bike to ride fast. So again, it's a preference thing. Just want to point out that it's not as beneficial to do a hot wax because it's going to be more expensive and it's going to last about the same amount of time as a rub-on wax. That's the maintenance on the skis that I would check every single time that you guys go out riding. Have fun out there, be safe. If you guys ever get into a situation, if you guys don't know how to fix something, please just call our customer service line. There's plenty of us here, and then we can walk you through anything you need to if you need to make a fix really quick.